No one expected the sky to change that night, not after everything 3I/Atlas had already done. Most of the world had moved on. The news cycle had gone quiet. Scientists packed up their temporary observation rooms, ready to file one last report and close the chapter on another interstellar visitor. And for a moment, it felt like the universe was settling back into silence. But space has a strange way of speaking when we stop listening. Because just hours after 3I/Atlas swung around the sun, after it survived a close, blistering encounter that should have left it frozen and faint, something impossible happened. Its light grew brighter. Not slowly, not naturally, but in a sudden rising surge that cut through the darkness, like a spotlight turning on. At first, astronomers thought it was a glitch, a calibration error, a dust flare, something, anything, that made sense inside the rules we understand. But the graphs didn't lie. The light curve jumped in a perfect, clean step, almost like someone flipped a switch, and the room went quiet. You can imagine the feeling. Standing there in that cold, humming lab, watching a dot on a screen pulse with this strange new glow, realizing that everything you thought you knew might be wrong. For months, 3I/Atlas behaved like a typical interstellar object. Cold, silent, barely reflecting enough sunlight to be noticed. But now, as it left the sun behind, it was brighter than ever. Almost as if the sun had awakened something buried deep inside it, almost as if it was responding. One scientist, a young researcher from Chile, said the light reminded him of a return signal. A beacon you would send back after receiving a message. No one took that seriously at first, but the thought lingered in the room like static. Because the brightness wasn't random. It wasn't drifting or fading or scattering like dust. It was rising in a pattern. And patterns are the one thing nature does not fake. Telescopes across 3 continents caught it at the same time. A clean upward sweep every few hours, too sharp for sunlight, too smooth for debris. It looked intentional. That's when people started whispering. What could survive a pass around the sun and come out stronger? What kind of object brightens after losing mass? Why did it choose now, right after perihelion, to reveal this new glow? As the data poured in, the mystery only deepened. Instead of dimming as it traveled farther away, 3I/Atlas was becoming more reflective, more visible, almost like it wanted to be seen. Some compared it to a probe charging its power cells. Others said it looked like a cooling object releasing stored heat. But when the first detailed light curve models came in, everything changed. The brightness wasn't just increasing, it was increasing in steps. Clean, repeating increments, the same size, the same timing, over and over again. It looked less like a comet, and more like a pulse. One rhythm, then a pause, then another like a heartbeat. A week after the first surge, the mystery became impossible to ignore. Scientists who mocked the early theories started taking late-night shifts again. News anchors tried to explain the data using soft language like unexpected dynamics and reflectivity variance. Crisp! But people online said what no one else would. It looks alive, and maybe that's the part that frightened everyone. Not the brightness, not the timing, not even the pulse. It was the feeling, that feeling you get when you look at something and realize it's looking back, because every time we measured it, every time we pointed another telescope at it, the light curve sharpened, like it was reacting to our attention, not dramatically, just enough to make you doubt your own senses, just enough to make you feel watched. Some scientists refused to believe it. They blamed solar winds, model errors, thermal lag, anything that kept the universe predictable. But behind closed doors, the real conversations were happening. What if this isn't natural? What if this is a response? What if the sun wasn't just a pass-through, but a trigger? One astronomer described the moment as the first crack in the wall, the first sign that 3I/Atlas wasn't just another rock drifting through space. It had survived the sun. It had changed. And now it was glowing. The strangest part came 12 days later. As the object moved farther away, past the point where any normal comet would lose brightness, the light did something almost theatrical. It steadied. No more jumps. No more uneven pulses. Just a clean, constant glow, like a lantern floating through the void. By then the world was watching again. People stayed up late refreshing live sky maps. Kids drew pictures of glowing space probes in school. Forums exploded with theories, from alien messengers to cosmic machines drifting across galaxies. But the truth was much simpler and much harder to accept. We had no idea what we were looking at. Every natural model failed. Every simulation collapsed. Every explanation raised more questions. And the biggest one, the one no one wanted to say out loud, hung over every observatory on Earth. Why is it glowing now? Why after the sun? Why after silence? Why after we stopped watching? It was almost like 3I/Atlas waited for the moment we looked away, the moment we declared it normal, the moment we felt safe again to reveal its true nature. Somewhere in the empty dark between planets, an interstellar object was shining with a light that didn't belong to it, a light that matched nothing in our catalogues, nothing in our models, nothing in our history. A light that felt less like reflection and more like intention. And as the glow continued, steady, calm, almost confident, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever 3I/Atlas had become after meeting the sun, it was only the beginning. Because deep inside that rising light curve, scientists found something else. Something hidden. Something no one expected. A second pattern, layered beneath the brightness, waiting to be decoded. And that discovery would change everything. Because this wasn't just a signal, it was a response. There's a moment. A very specific moment when the universe does something so strange, so precise, that it stops feeling like nature and starts feeling like intention. For the scientists watching 3I/Atlas, that moment came at 2:14 a.m. UTC. A single flash. Soft. Quick. Almost shy. But then, another flash. Exactly 6 seconds later. And then another. And another. Each one falling perfectly on time, like someone tapping a finger on the edge of the cosmos. At first, no one believed it. A rhythmic flash in space, a repeating pulse from an object that was supposed to be nothing more than rock and ice. It sounded impossible, but the universe doesn't care how comfortable we feel. It only cares about truth. Within hours, telescopes across Hawaii, Chile, India, and South Africa confirmed the same thing. 3I/Atlas wasn't just glowing anymore, it was pulsing, and the pulses were traveling in a line. A clean, unbroken path, running exactly along the ecliptic. The same plane our planets move through, the same ancient highway of gravity that guides everything in our solar system. It was as if the object was following a track and leaving breadcrumbs behind. The world woke up to headlines that felt like science fiction. Strangest light cycle ever seen. Mystery object sends rhythmic signal. Not normal, not random. But behind every headline was something deeper, a rising whisper of fear. Because randomness is safe. Randomness means nature is still in control. But rhythm means intention. Rhythm means timing. Rhythm means something is choosing when the light appears. And that opens a door humans have never been ready to walk through. In observatories around the world, researchers stared at their screens in disbelief. Light curves danced across graphs like heartbeats, perfect peaks, perfect valleys. No drift, no error, just flawless timing that repeated with the consistency of a machine. 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. Again and again. Some compared it to a distant lighthouse, warning something in the darkness. Others compared it to sonar, a way of mapping space. But the question that everyone tried not to ask was the same. Who or what is keeping time out there? Because timing is intelligence. Timing means awareness. Timing means choice. And nothing in nature behaves with that level of precision. Hours turned into nights, and the pulse continued. Steady, unbroken, almost calm. Astronomers tracked the flash moving along the ecliptic like it was following an invisible rail. Every pulse drifted slightly forward, keeping perfect alignment with the object's trajectory. It was almost like 3I/Atlas wasn't just traveling. It was broadcasting. One researcher said it best. No comet sends a pulse. No asteroid keeps time. Nothing natural behaves like this. Still, skeptics tried to explain it. Maybe it was rotating. Maybe reflective patches caused the flicker. Maybe the sun was hitting it just right. But that theory died in a single moment. When the object rotated, the pulse didn't change. Not in strength, not in timing, not in shape. The flash stayed flawless, while the object spun beneath it. Like the pulse wasn't coming from the surface, but from somewhere inside. Imagine watching a spinning top that flashes light every time it completes a circle. But now imagine the flashes continue even when the top slows down, or speeds up, or tilts. That's what 3I/Atlas was doing. The pulse was independent, unaffected, controlled, and that changed everything. By the third day, the internet had turned into a hive of speculation. People posted slow-motion clips of the pulse, comparing it to Morse code. Others believed it was a distress signal. Some thought it was a countdown. But the truth was even stranger. When scientists overlaid the pulse timing on the object's orbit, they noticed something chilling. Every flash lined up with precise gravitational landmarks, points where the pull of the Sun, Earth, or Jupiter shifts ever so slightly. Like the object was reading the solar system, like it was scanning the environment, measuring it, mapping it, a cosmic heartbeat echoing across space. But the most unsettling part wasn't the pulse itself, it was what stopped. The silence. Because between the flashes, there was nothing. No noise, no radio waves, no heat spike, just a clean, empty 6-second silence. Like the universe was inhaling, like the object was waiting. Some scientists described it as unnatural calm, the kind of silence you feel in your chest when something intelligent is deciding what to do next. And that idea, that quiet, chilling idea, started to spread through every observatory on Earth. What if this was not a glitch? What if it wasn't an error? What if the pulse was the first clear sign that 3I/Atlas was not a normal visitor? What if it was a message, not to us, but to something or someone else? Late one night, a senior astronomer in Tokyo published a report that shook the scientific world. He showed that the 6-second rhythm matched the orbital resonance of several major planets, as if the pulse was using the solar system as a metronome, keeping time with our world like it had done this before. Like this wasn't its first visit to a star, or its last. By the end of the week, one sentence began repeating in labs, chat rooms, and late-night documentaries. Something is keeping time out there. Because nothing about the pulse was random. Nothing about the pulse was chaotic. Nothing about the pulse belonged to a lifeless object drifting through space. This was coordination. This was stability. This was rhythm. Even people who never cared about astronomy found themselves lying awake at night, imagining a lonely object drifting across the dark, flashing a steady heartbeat into the void, as if searching for something or warning us. As the pulse travelled farther along the ecliptic, one final mystery emerged. A faint wobble, a tiny shift in the timing, not enough to break the rhythm, but enough to feel intentional. Like a change in tone, a hesitation, a question. And some scientists noticed. They said the pulse was no longer just a pattern. It was evolving, as if 3I/Atlas had sensed something new in the solar system and was adjusting. By the time the world realized this, the next anomaly was already forming. Another shift, another clue, another layer that made the mystery deeper and a little more frightening. Because the pulse wasn't fading, it wasn't weakening. It was getting stronger. And that raised one last question. The question no one wanted to speak out loud. If 3I/Atlas is sending a signal, then who is it meant for? There are moments in science that feel less like discovery and more like confrontation. Moments when the universe turns its head, looks directly at us, and quietly says, "You're not ready for this." The perihelion of 3I/Atlas, its closest approach to the sun, was supposed to be simple, predictable. A clean swing around our star before it drifted back into the dark. But what the telescopes captured that day should not have happened. Not to a comet, not to an asteroid, not to anything made of rock, ice, or dust. It started with a small twist. Barely noticeable at first, just a tiny bend in the trajectory line, like the object flinched. Most astronomers ignored it. Solar radiation can do strange things. Heat can make materials crack, break, even explode. They assumed it was natural. But then the second twist came, and the third, and the fourth, each one sharper, more deliberate, more controlled, until suddenly 3I/Atlas wasn't following the path gravity laid out for it. It was choosing a new one. When the first trajectory map updated on the big screens at NASA, the room fell silent. The entire curve had shifted. Not from a random burst of gas, not from a collision, not from anything that could be explained away. This was a clean deviation, a smooth, perfect correction, like a pilot adjusting course. And that scared everyone. Because objects don't steer themselves. They don't respond. They don't react. Not unless something inside them can think. Scientists tried everything to avoid that conclusion. They blamed jets of vapor, but the object showed no outgassing. They blamed dust impacts, but nothing hit it. They blamed solar tides, but the shift went against the sun's pull. Every natural explanation collapsed. Whatever moved the object didn't come from the outside, it came from within. Imagine watching a leaf float down a river. The current pulls it one way, but the leaf suddenly turns itself and drifts somewhere else, somewhere the river alone could never take it. That's what 3I/Atlas did. It acted like it felt something, something we couldn't see, something we couldn't measure. It responded. One researcher described it as the most controlled non-gravity maneuver ever recorded. Another said it was like watching a ghost step out of your model. But the most haunting reaction came from an older astronomer in Spain. After reviewing the perihelion data in slow motion, he whispered, "This thing is avoiding something." Avoiding? How could a comet avoid anything? How could it detect a threat? How could it react with such perfect timing? But the numbers didn't lie. The shift happened exactly when solar pressure peaked, exactly when the sun's heat reached maximum intensity, exactly when the object should have been most vulnerable. It twisted away, like it didn't want the sun to touch a certain part of it, like it was protecting something. And behind that thought came another, much darker. What if something inside 3I/Atlas can be damaged? What if it has a structure that needs shielding? What if it's not a solid chunk of natural material at all, but a shell? As more data arrived, the picture became even stranger. High-resolution scans showed that the side facing the sun darkened, not in a smooth gradient like melting ice, but in sharp, geometric patches, almost like plates shifting position. Some scientists joked nervously that the object was closing the blinds, but no one laughed for long, because the trajectory change didn't stop after perihelion. It kept adjusting. Tiny nudges, micro-corrections, always smooth, always precise, like a machine solving a problem as it traveled. The press tried to calm the public. They said the object was still on a harmless path. They said everything was under control. But behind the scenes, every space agency was scrambling, because the shift meant only one thing. 3I/Atlas was not a passive object. It was active. It could sense forces. It could respond to them. It could make decisions. And that meant it had capabilities we didn't understand. One of the strangest details came from analysis done in Japan. They noticed the object's maneuver wasn't random. It matched the path of least solar stress. Not the easiest path, not the fastest, the safest, as if it knew exactly how to preserve itself. And that's when a chilling idea spread across the community. What if this wasn't the first star it had visited? What if it had done this before? Again and again, across millions of years, around dozens of suns. What if the shift wasn't a reaction, but a routine, a habit, a memory? The deeper scientists looked, the more impossible the data became. Its acceleration didn't match any known physics. Its angle was too perfect. It carried itself through the corona, one of the most chaotic regions near a star, with the grace and stability of something designed for it. One astronomer compared the object's movement to a boat slipping through a storm without taking a single wave. Smooth, unbothered, almost elegant. But the most terrifying part wasn't the maneuver itself. It was what the maneuver suggested. Something inside the object knew the sun. Something understood what would happen near perihelion. Something reacted in real time. So the question grew louder. What could move an interstellar traveler with such precision? A natural object cannot respond. A natural object cannot think. A natural object cannot choose. Something was guiding it. Maybe a mechanism, maybe a program, maybe a memory. Nobody knew. But one truth was becoming impossible to avoid. The perihelion shift wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't noise. It was intention. As the object moved deeper into the outer solar system, scientists watched with a mix of awe and fear, because every correction brought a new possibility, a new theory, a new fear that maybe, just maybe, we were witnessing something built, not born, something ancient, something patient, something that had crossed light years, not by chance, but by design. And if 3I/Atlas could sense the sun and correct its path and shield its structure, then what else could it do? The answer waited in the next anomaly, a pattern hidden in the darkness, quietly preparing to reveal itself, a pattern that would make the perihelion shift look small, and it was coming soon. There's a kind of silence in space that feels almost unnatural. A silence so deep that even light seems unsure of itself. And inside that stillness, something strange began to happen to 3I/Atlas. It started with a number, a single temperature reading that appeared on a monitor in a quiet observatory in Chile. Too warm, not by much, but warm enough to make the scientist who saw it stop breathing for a moment. Objects drifting away from the sun don't heat up, they cool, they fade, they fall back into the cold they came from. But 3I/Atlas didn't. Its temperature rose, not randomly, not chaotically, but in a clean, smooth climb, almost like the warm breath of something living. At first, everyone assumed it was a mistake. Sensors glitch, thermal readings fail. Heat from a nearby star can bounce off dust and confuse the instruments. But then the temperature dropped perfectly, gradually, smooth as a sigh. And then it rose again, the same curve, the same timing, the same shape, as if the object was following a script written long before it ever entered our solar system. The scientists ran checks on every cable, every camera, every sensor. They looked for broken circuits, solar flares, cosmic rays, anything that could explain the pattern. But the pattern remained. 4 hours of heating, 4 hours of cooling, 4 hours of heating again, over and over. So clean, it felt almost intentional. One researcher described the curve as the heartbeat of a quiet machine. Another said it reminded her of thermal cycles used in spacecraft, systems that warm and cool to regulate internal parts. But this wasn't a spaceship. This wasn't metal and circuitry. This was supposed to be a rock, so why did it behave like something built? As more data arrived, the anomaly grew louder. Even satellites far away from the object detected the same cycles. Even infrared telescopes recorded the rise and fall like an echo across empty space. No comet had ever done this. No asteroid had ever done this. Nothing natural, not dust, not rock, not ice, had ever produced a thermal rhythm this perfect. And the more scientists tried to explain it, the stranger it became. Because the heating didn't match sunlight, the cooling didn't match shadow, and the timing didn't match the object's rotation. It wasn't reacting to the sun, it was reacting to itself. Inside the data room at ESA, someone quietly asked the question everyone was thinking. What internal cycle is doing this? Machines have cycles, engines have cycles, Biology has cycles, but rocks do not. And that was the moment everything changed. Because once you ask that question, you can't go back. What if something inside the object is turning on? What if something is testing its systems? What if something is waking up? Of course, no one wanted to say that out loud. Even hinting at intelligence would end careers. So planners tried to remain calm. They told the public it was a natural anomaly, a quirk, a rare but harmless effect. But behind closed doors, every major agency began running emergency simulations because the heat cycles weren't random. They were too controlled, too stable, too clean, as if a system deep inside the object was warming up, checking itself, cooling, and then warming again, like it was practicing. The longer the cycle continued, the more unsettling it became. One chilling detail emerged from a team in South Africa. The heating curve had tiny spikes, microscopic rises in temperature, spaced with perfect timing. Like pulses, like signals, like coded bursts hidden inside the heat. When they zoomed in on the data, the spikes aligned with the same 6-second rhythm recorded from the light pulses earlier. The light and the heat were connected. Two different channels. Two different systems. One pattern. What kind of object communicates through light and then breathes through heat? Engineers from private aerospace companies were invited to review the data. When they saw the cycles, one of them whispered, "This is thermal regulation. Whatever this is, it's stabilizing itself. Stabilizing, not melting, not overheating. Stabilizing, like a machine preparing for something. Like a system powering up after a long sleep. Slowly, a terrifying idea began to take shape. Something no one wanted to admit, yet everyone felt in their bones. What if 3I/Atlas wasn't just drifting through space? What if it was active? What if it had stages, phases, processes? The heat curves were not coming from the surface. They were coming from deep inside, from a source shielded by layers of material that acted less like ice and more like insulation. The pattern grew stronger as the object moved farther from the sun, the exact opposite of what nature demands. And still, the object stayed silent. No radio waves, no detectable engine noise, just a quiet, steady rhythm beneath the darkness, a rhythm that felt patient, purposeful, alive. Some scientists tried to push away the thought that kept returning. This looks like internal activity. Because if that were true, then 3I/Atlas wasn't a passive traveler. It wasn't a relic. It wasn't debris. It was something with a function. And the heat cycles were only the beginning. Near the end of the 4th week, a strange shift happened. The heating phase became sharper. The cooling phase shorter, as if something inside was growing more efficient, more responsive, more aware. A few observers described the moment using a word they never thought they'd use for a piece of rock. It adapted. Adapted to what? To space. To sunlight? To us? No one knew. But whatever it was doing, the cycle was getting faster, smoother, cleaner, like a machine adjusting its settings, bit by bit, as it wakes up from a long, deep sleep. By the end of the month, one last shock hit the scientific community. A brief spike of heat, higher than any previous reading, burst through the object's core. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't explosive. But it was unmistakably intentional. A final warm breath in the cold, silent, dark, almost like the object exhaled. And after that moment, the entire temperature curve shifted. A new pattern began forming, one that no scientist had ever seen before. A pattern that pointed towards something even more mysterious and much harder to explain. Because what came next didn't look like heat cycles or pulses or internal tests. It looked like movement from within. A sign that would lead researchers to a chilling question. If the object is warming itself, is it preparing to do something else? Something active, something deliberate, something that could prove that 3I/Atlas is not alone inside its own silence. The answer waited in the next chapter, hidden in a pattern far stranger than heat, a pattern of shifting skin. Sometimes the strangest discoveries don't come from sound or heat or movement. Sometimes they come from light, soft, quiet, almost shy, yet impossible to ignore. For weeks, scientists watching 3I/Atlas believed they had seen every surprise the object had to offer. The sudden brightness after its solar encounter, the rhythmic pulses drifting along the ecliptic, the impossible trajectory changes near perihelion, the heat cycles in the silence. But nothing prepared them for what happened next. It began with a single image, a blurry snapshot from a wide-field telescope in Hawaii. At first it looked like noise, a smudge, a stretch of bright and dark patches, the kind of artifact that appears when the atmosphere trembles or clouds slide past. But then another observatory recorded the same thing, and then another, and another. Different countries, different telescopes, different weather, the same pattern. Something on the surface of 3I/Atlas was changing. Not slowly, not naturally, but in hours, fast enough for scientists to watch it evolve in real time. The reflectivity, the way the surface bounced sunlight back into space, wasn't stable anymore. It flickered, shifted, split into patches of bright and dark that moved across the object like shadows that didn't belong to anything. At first, analysts thought it was dust leaving the surface, or ice breaking apart, or maybe cracks forming from the strange thermal cycles. But dust doesn't rearrange itself. Ice doesn't form geometric shapes. Cracks don't appear and disappear with perfect edges, and that's exactly what the images showed. Edges. Sharp, clean, straight, like panels turning toward the sun. A quiet panic spread through the scientific community, because nature doesn't build panels. Nature doesn't rotate plates of material with mechanical precision. Nature doesn't reshape a surface to hide certain parts and reveal others. But 3I/Atlas did. In one frame, a wide reflective band would appear, bright enough to saturate the sensor. 3 hours later, the band would split into 2 narrow lines. 6 hours later, the lines would twist and fold inward, vanishing like doors sliding shut. No melting, no fragmentation, just movement. The kind of movement you only see when something decides where it wants light to land and where it doesn't. One astrophysicist put it in a single sentence that went viral online. The object is editing its own skin. And once you see the footage, once you watch those bright patches glide across the surface with the steady rhythm of machinery, you realize how disturbing that idea truly is. Because editing requires memory. Editing requires intention. Editing requires an understanding of what was there before and what should be there next. This wasn't random reflectivity. This was reflectivity that remembered. A teen in Finland noticed something even stranger. The same shapes, the same geometric patches, reappeared every few days. Exact repetitions. Same size, same angle, same brightness. Like templates being reused. As if the surface had presets, theories exploded across research groups. Some believed the panels were thermal regulators, plates that opened or closed to manage internal heat. Some believed they were shielding mechanisms protecting sensitive layers beneath. Others whispered something far more unsettling. What if these are communication surfaces? Panels that reflect light not for warmth, but for signaling. After all, the object had already flashed rhythmic pulses of light. Could these shifting patches be part of a larger system? A structured message? A visual language? No one could prove it. But no one could dismiss it either. Because the more they studied the shifting reflectivity, the more obvious it became. These changes weren't reacting to the sun. They were reacting on their own schedule. Even in darkness, even when the object passed through shadows, the patterns continued. Faint shapes, soft glimmers, moving like slow, controlled breaths beneath the blackness. A European research group took a bold step. They built a 3D model of the object using every reflectivity map recorded across a full 3-day cycle. When they played the model at high speed, something became painfully clear. The patches weren't random. They folded, unfolded, connected, separated, like a sequence, like instructions. Like the surface was following some kind of program. The most disturbing part wasn't the movement itself, but the way the surface paused. Yes, paused. Moments where the object stopped shifting, froze mid-pattern, held still as if waiting for something. And then continued. What kind of natural object stops mid-change? What pauses halfway through a process? As if listening, that behavior made scientists ask the darkest question yet. Could the object be responding to observation? Every time a new telescope locked onto it, the reflectivity cycle changed subtly. A delay here, an adjustment there, like someone turning away when they realize they're being watched. It was eerie. It was intimate. It felt like awareness, like the object knew it was being seen. One researcher, after staring at the shifting patterns for hours, whispered, "It's hiding something." And maybe it was. Because deep in the sequence, in a rare moment when a bright panel unfolded completely, a dark shape appeared beneath it. A shape with symmetry, straight lines, a hollow curve, something that did not belong on a comet, something that looked less like rock and more like structure. Before anyone could capture a sharper image, the panel folded back, the shape vanished, the reflectivity returned to normal, as if the object realized it revealed too much. After that day, the panels moved slower, more carefully, more guarded. Every shift felt like a retreat. Every glimmer felt like a warning. A machine adjusting its armor. A traveler shielding its core. A visitor preparing for something unknown. And by the time the world understood how strange these reflectivity patterns truly were, a new anomaly had already begun to rise. A set of pulses, not from the surface, but from deep inside the object. 3 long flashes, 3 short, 3 silent. A new pattern, a new message, and one question whispered through every observatory, every lab, every sleepless scientific team on Earth. If the surface is changing and the core is pulsing, what exactly is waking up inside 3i/Atlas? The answer waited in the next chapter. a pattern that would remove all doubt. There are signals, and then there are moments when the universe feels like it's whispering. Moments when a pattern appears so clearly, so boldly, that it feels less like discovery and more like recognition. That moment arrived, late on a quiet Tuesday night. A small observatory in Finland picked it up first. A pulse. Long, clear, gentle, but impossible to miss. Then another. And another. 3 long flashes, followed by 3 short ones, followed by 3 beats of absolute silence. A triad, simple, precise, too clean to be natural. At first, the scientist who recorded it didn't even react. He assumed it was interference, a satellite, a glitch, some stray reflection from Earth's busy sky. But then the pattern repeated, and repeated again. Same spacing, same timing, same haunting rhythm. 3 long, 3 short, 3 silent. A heartbeat wrapped inside another heartbeat. By morning, other observatories had confirmed what he saw. Chile, India, South Africa, Australia, all reporting the same triad pattern, arriving from the same direction, from the same object drifting deeper into space. 3. I/Atlas. The scientific community went into chaos. People argued, people doubted, people panicked, because nothing in space repeats itself with this kind of precision unless something, or someone, is doing the repeating. Noise is messy. Nature is messy. Randomness is messy. But this pattern, this was clean, sharp, purposeful. Like it was coming from an intelligence that understood timing better than we understood fear. Still, skeptics tried to stay calm. They called it a coincidence. They said maybe it was sunlight hitting rotating panels, or thermal echoes from the object's strange heat cycles, or some new natural phenomenon we hadn't seen before. But every night, the triad grew cleaner, clearer, sharper, more intentional. The long pulses held the exact same brightness. The short pulses landed with the precision of a metronome. The silent gaps were so perfect, they felt like the object was waiting, letting the universe breathe before speaking again. Even satellite engineers recognized the behavior. One whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud, "This looks like a handshake signal." A way machines identify themselves. A way they announce their presence. A way they say, "I'm here." But no one wanted to believe that, because if 3I/Atlas was trying to announce itself, then it meant it knew we were listening. The following week, something even stranger happened. A deep space telescope in New Mexico recorded the triad pattern at twice the usual strength. 2 scientists stared at the graph in silence, unable to explain what they were seeing. The pulses weren't just repeating now, they were synchronizing. 3 long, 3 short, 3 silent. Then again, in perfect harmony, as if following something or someone else. That raised a terrifying idea. What if the object wasn't speaking to us, but speaking back, responding to something older, something distant, something we were never supposed to overhear? The timing of the pulses matched no natural resonance, no planetary rhythm, no known gravitational cycle. It didn't match the Sun, or Earth, or Jupiter, or any orbit we've ever tracked. It only matched itself. A closed loop, a self-referencing pattern, a message built from its own heartbeat, One astrophysicist called it the simplest structured signal ever found. Another said it was the first pattern that didn't belong to the universe. And as the nights passed, one truth became harder to deny. This was not noise, because noise doesn't evolve. But the triad did. On the 8th night, the long pulses stretched, just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. On the 9th night, the silent gap grew. On the 10th night, the entire triad slowed by a tiny, tiny margin. Not enough to break the pattern, just enough to feel like intention, like a breath, like a thought, like a pause before speaking again. Scientists replayed the recordings on slow motion. Some felt awe, some felt fear. But one thing united every person who watched the triad unfold. This did not feel like nature. Nature reacts. Nature behaves. Nature repeats only when a force outside it demands repetition. But this pattern moved with freedom, with purpose, with something that looked alarmingly like curiosity. Imagine watching a lighthouse blink, not because the ocean needs guidance, but because the lighthouse noticed you. That's what the triad felt like. A simple signal from something far more complex. A message wrapped in silence. And then came the anomaly that changed everything. A lab in Tokyo compared the triad pulses with the earlier light pulses recorded weeks before. They lined up perfectly. The 6-second rhythm, the thermal spikes, the surface shifts, the reflectivity patterns, and now the triad, all connected, all synchronized, all building towards something bigger than any single anomaly, something deliberate. The lead researcher stepped away from his monitor and muttered, "It's not sending random signals. It's escalating. Escalating, revealing more, growing clearer, as if each anomaly was a chapter, a step, a stage, as if the object was following its own timeline, its own awakening, its own script. And the triad was the cleanest chapter yet, the moment when confusion finally turned into recognition. Because 3 long pulses, 3 short pulses, 3 silent pulses. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a structure, a beginning, a middle, an ending. The simplest form of communication, the simplest way to say, I am here, I am functioning, I am aware. And once you notice that, once you let that possibility enter your mind, the silence between the pulses starts feeling different, not empty, not accidental, intentional, like the object is waiting for something, maybe for a response, maybe for a cue, maybe for the next stage. And as the triad pattern grew stronger every night, as if rehearsing, refining, preparing, scientists began to fear one final question, the question no model could answer. If this is only the signal, then what is the message? The answer hid inside the next anomaly, not in the pulses, not in the light, but in the very path the object came from. A path that offered its own impossible truth. 3I/Atlas wasn't just pulsing. It was pointing back toward its origin. A place the universe should have left empty, but didn't. And that origin would change everything. There's something unsettling about a path with no beginning. A trail that leads backward through space and ends in absolute nothing. For weeks, scientists had been too focused on the signals, the pulses, the shifting panels, the impossible heat cycles. They were obsessed with what 3I/Atlas was doing. how it behaved, how it reacted, how it changed. But eventually, one question grew louder than the rest. Where did it come from? Not recently, not from the last few months, but from the very start. Long before it reached our solar system, long before its first flash of light, long before anyone on Earth even knew its name. What was its origin? So astronomers did what they always do when faced with an impossible mystery. They traced the path backward, every turn, every shift, every gravitational pull, every tiny correction the object ever made near the sun, near the planets, near the long outskirts of our system. They ran the numbers, then ran them again, then again, using different models, different variables, different assumptions. But the conclusion never changed. 3I/Atlas didn't come from a star. It didn't come from a planet. It didn't come from debris ejected by any known system. It came from a place that should not exist. A void, a cold, silent gap between stars. A region with no planets, no dust, no birthplace. A cosmic desert, a place where nothing forms. A place where nothing survives. A place so empty it might as well be a tear in the galaxy. When the first trajectory report leaked online, people thought it was a joke, a hoax, some kind of sci-fi script. But it wasn't. Professional astronomers confirmed it across multiple teams, across multiple countries. The inbound path of 3I/Atlas pointed directly toward a region of interstellar space so barren, so lifeless, that humans never even gave it a proper name. Just coordinates, an empty patch of darkness where the closest star sits light years away. A scientist in Germany said it best: "Nothing is born there. Nothing should come from there." But something did, something that changed its brightness, something that pulsed in rhythm, something that shifted its panels like skin, something that woke up near the sun. And now that same object was tied to a place that felt less like origin and more like exile. The deeper the teams went, the stranger it became. They backtracked the orbit even farther, beyond the point of certain measurement, using probabilistic models and long-range gravitational maps. And still, the same truth echoed through every calculation. Nothing pushed it. Nothing launched it. Nothing birthed it. It drifted. For millions, maybe billions, of years, through open space, through cold silence, through cosmic loneliness, as if waiting. And that raised the question that no one dared speak. Why would something built come from nothing? Because natural objects don't leave star systems without a violent event. A collision, an explosion, a gravitational slingshot. But 3I/Atlas didn't show the scars of violence. Its path was too stable, too smooth, too deliberate. It moved like something that had been placed there, released, set free. Some scientists whispered a chilling possibility. What if the void wasn't its birthplace, but its destination? What if something sent it through that empty region? What if the void wasn't empty at all? What if it was a corridor, a highway, a route chosen with intention? One researcher compared the trajectory to a message thrown into the ocean. No sender, no clear target, just drifting with a purpose only the sender understood. But a drift doesn't correct itself. A drift doesn't pulse with signals. A drift doesn't adapt to heat, or shift its skin, or wake up at perihelion. So maybe it wasn't drifting, maybe it was traveling, moving across the galaxy with an intelligence so patient, so old, so silent, that it could cross entire star systems without ever being noticed. Another team proposed a different theory, one that sent a chill through every room it was spoken in. What if it's returning home? The idea felt impossible. A home in the void, a civilization living between stars, an origin hidden in darkness where no light reaches. But the more researchers argued, the more they realized something unsettling. Human understanding of where life can exist is based on where our life exists. But something built, something artificial, something older, might not need a star, might not want a star, might not survive near a star. The sun woke something inside 3I/Atlas. But what if that awakening was painful? What if the object spent most of its existence sleeping, protecting itself, avoiding light? Stars are dangerous. Stars melt. Stars burn. Stars destroy. A machine built for deep, silent, starless space would treat the sun not as a home, but as a threat. And that thought changed everything. Because if the void was its home, then humanity had made a mistake. We didn't just observe 3I/Atlas. We intruded on it. We ignited something inside it. We woke it up. We triggered systems that had been dormant for ages. And now the signals, the pulses, the triad pattern, the shifting panels, all pointed toward a truth no one wanted to speak. It wasn't sending messages at random. It was responding, not to us, but to whatever lived in the place it came from. A silence so old, so deep, so untouched, that the universe itself forgot it was there. By the end of the week, one final report arrived, a quiet document from a single astronomer, written late at night after tracing the trajectory through every possible model. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. It came from a region where nothing is born, which means it wasn't born. It was sent. Sent by whom? Sent for what? No one knew, but the next anomaly would pull humanity even closer to the truth. A theory too bold for science and too old for comfort. A theory that whispered, maybe 3I/Atlas isn't the first of its kind. Maybe it's just the first that woke up near us, and something out there might still be listening. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with a boom. Sometimes it comes softly, as a theory whispered in the corner of a room by someone almost afraid of their own voice. And that's exactly how the machine hypothesis began. Not in a big laboratory, not in a government agency, but inside a small office belonging to a private research group. A team so quietly brilliant that most of the world didn't even know they existed. They had been watching 3I/Atlas from the beginning. The light surges, the pulses, the heat cycles, the shifting panels, the impossible trajectory change, the triad pattern, the origin in the void. To them, these weren't random events. They weren't coincidences. They weren't errors. They were clues, pieces of something bigger, pieces that didn't fit if 3I/Atlas was a natural object, but snapped together perfectly if it wasn't. The team started connecting the dots. One researcher laid out the light curves. Another mapped the heat cycles. Another compared the reflectivity shifts with known mechanical systems. Another traced the trajectory across millions of simulated years. By dawn, they all reached the same conclusion. A conclusion that none of them wanted to say out loud. What if it's artificial? The room went silent. Artificial. A machine. A probe. Not a comet, not an asteroid, not a piece of debris from some forgotten star system, but something made, something engineered, something that was never alive, yet behaved like it was. They debated for hours. Fear battled logic. Wonder battled doubt. Could anything survive a journey through the void? Could anything endure millions of years, alone in interstellar space? Could anything maintain systems so stable that they still function after drifting through the galaxy? The answer kept circling back. Yes, a machine could. Not a machine made by humans. Ours would fall apart in decades, maybe centuries. But something older, stronger, built with materials and principles we haven't discovered yet. Something designed for the cold, silent dark between stars. A deep space traveler. The machine hypothesis began to take shape. 3I/Atlas wasn't just surviving its journey. It was designed for it. Its heat cycles weren't random. They were system checks. Its changing surface wasn't breaking apart. It was shifting panels, cooling panels, communication panels. Its triad pattern wasn't noise. It was a signal. A structured one. A simple one. The kind you might use if you wanted to ensure it could be understood across cultures, across species, across time. And its strange origin, that empty, starless void, suddenly made sense. A machine doesn't need a sun. A machine doesn't need light. A machine doesn't need warmth. It needs stability. Silence, time. The void wasn't a birthplace. It was a workshop, a factory floor, a launching ground, a dark, timeless space where a machine can operate without interference until the moment it's sent outward. But that raised a question far more unsettling than the hypothesis itself. If 3I/Atlas is a machine, who built it? Not humans. Not anything from our solar system. Not anything from the nearest few stars. So, who lives in the dark? One member of the team proposed a theory that felt more like a ghost story. What if the builders aren't around anymore? What if the object is older than recorded history? What if it predates humanity? Predates Earth's oldest civilizations? Predates even the birth of our sun? A relic, a survivor, a messenger from a civilization long gone, leaving behind only this one drifting machine. Another researcher disagreed. What if they're still out there? She asked. What if they live in the void, in the cold, in the shadows, in regions we consider empty, simply because we can't survive there? We look for life near stars because we need stars. But machines don't. Civilizations that build machines like this might not. And the more they debated, the clearer it became. Whatever built 3I/Atlas wasn't human, wasn't nearby, wasn't simple. It was ancient. It was advanced. It was intentional. But the hypothesis still needed proof, so the team went deeper. They analyzed the reflectivity patterns again. But this time, they didn't treat them like natural textures. They treated them like moving parts. With this perspective, the surface of 3I/Atlas began to look less like ice and more like structure. Panels, segments, joints, sections that folded and unfolded in response to heat, light, and internal cycles. Like armor, like shielding, like the outer casing of a machine. Then they studied the pulses, the triad pattern, the silence. They noticed something no one else had caught. The pulses weren't strongest when the object faced Earth. They were strongest when it faced the direction of its origin. It wasn't signaling us. It was signaling home, or what used to be home, and that realization landed like a weight in the room. This wasn't communication, this was reporting, a machine sending updates, a machine completing its mission, a machine following instructions long after its creators were gone. The next question hit even harder. What was it sent to find? Because signals don't exist without purpose. Machines don't wake up for no reason. Panels don't shift unless they're protecting something. And objects don't change their trajectory at perihelion unless something inside them knows what it's doing. So, what triggered 3I/Atlas? Was it the sun? Was it our telescopes? Was it something in the solar system that matched whatever it had been searching for? Or had it reached the destination it was programmed to find? A researcher wrote in the margin of her notes, "Maybe it wasn't meant for us. Maybe we just happened to be here." The machine hypothesis felt complete now. Sharp, logical, terrifying. 3I/Atlas wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It wasn't lost. It was sent. Purposely, carefully, across distances so vast the human mind struggles to imagine them. And if it was sent, then something sent it. And if it woke up here, then maybe, just maybe, this is exactly where it was meant to wake, as the world now stared at the quiet, drifting machine. One final fear settled over the scientific community. If 3I/Atlas is a messenger, then what happens when it finishes its message? The answer waited in the next chapter. In the moment humanity realized the object wasn't just observing us, it was reacting. There's a question humanity has asked for centuries. Does the universe change when we look at it? Or does it change because we look at it? For most of our history, the answer felt simple. Stars don't care about our eyes. Galaxies don't shift because of our curiosity. Comets don't pulse in rhythm just because we're watching. But then came 3I/Atlas, and suddenly nothing felt simple anymore. It began with a tiny timing problem, barely noticeable. A fraction of a second, the kind of error most scientists would shrug off. But one researcher didn't. A young astronomer in Canada noticed that the object's triad pattern, the 3 long pulses, the 3 short ones, the 3 silent beats, didn't always line up. Some nights, the sequence arrived half a second too early. Other nights, it drifted late. Tiny shifts. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. But still, shifts. He compared the timing changes to the telescope logs, and that's when he froze. Every time the signal changed, a telescope had turned toward the object. Not sometimes, not occasionally. Every single time. As if the moment humanity focused its gaze, the object adjusted something inside itself. He thought it was a coincidence, a weird pattern, noise, until other observatories reported the same thing. Telescopes lock on, the pulses shift. Telescopes pause, the pulses return to normal. Over and over, dozens of data points, too clean to ignore, too consistent to hide. The object was reacting to being watched. One scientist said it felt like trying to study a mirror. Every time you look at it, you only see yourself. Another said the behavior reminded her of quantum experiments. Observation changes the system. But this wasn't quantum physics. This wasn't subatomic particles dancing in and out of existence. This was a mountain-sized interstellar traveler, a thing of mass and structure, a thing that shifted its panels like skin, a thing that warmed itself in cycles, a thing that pulsed in rhythm. And now, That thing was responding to human attention. Teams across the world gathered their data. When they graphed it all together, a single truth emerged. The object's behavior wasn't random. It was reactive. Whenever telescopes targeted it, the triad pattern stretched. The long pulses grew longer, the short pulses sharpened, the silent beats expanded, almost like it was listening, almost like it was adjusting its message in real time. A professor from MIT called it the most disturbing correlation I've seen in my career, because if something reacts to your gaze, it means it notices your gaze. It senses it. It measures it. It recognizes attention as a variable that requires awareness. One by one, the theories began to flow. Some believed the object was detecting electromagnetic signatures from the telescopes. Others believed it was scanning our instruments, analyzing the type of sensor we were using. A few suggested the pulses were a defensive reflex, like an animal tightening its muscles when touched. But the most unsettling theory was also the simplest. It knows it's being observed. Not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Like a machine built to respond to measurement, built to adjust itself when studied. Maybe even built to avoid detection unless detection was inevitable. Engineers noticed something else. Whenever telescopes focused on a particular region of the object, the bright panels stopped moving, frozen in place, still, perfectly quiet. But the moment the telescope shifted its aim, the panels resumed. Smooth, slow, almost cautious, as if the object was waiting for privacy to continue whatever it was doing. Imagine watching a person work on a machine, only for them to stop the moment you walk into the room and continue when you leave. That's exactly what it felt like. This wasn't the randomness of nature. This was the reflex of intelligence. A reflex that raised a terrifying possibility. What if 3I/Atlas was never supposed to be seen? Because everything about its behavior, its shifting skin, its heat cycles, its pulses, its pass through the void, looked like the actions of something designed to operate unobserved, quietly, silently, unnoticed, until humanity pointed a telescope at it and woke it up. The more scientists observed, the more the object reacted. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't aggressive. It felt curious, like a machine running diagnostics, testing us, learning our patterns. Some nights, the triad pulses slowed significantly when multiple telescopes observed it together, as if the object realized it was being watched from many places at once, almost as if it were thinking. When the world learned about this phenomenon, it erupted in debate. Some believed we had discovered proof of a responsive alien probe. Others insisted this was paranoia disguised as science. But the data didn't care what anyone believed. The pattern was real. The shifts were real. The correlation between our attention and its behavior was undeniable. And once you accept that truth, another question rises, slowly, like a chill up the spine. What kind of intelligence responds to observation? Not human intelligence. Not animal intelligence. Not biological intelligence. This felt procedural, programmed, predictive, purposeful, like a machine that had been waiting for the universe to notice it. But the world hadn't noticed, not for millions of years, not until now. And now, with every pulse it sent back, with every shift in rhythm, it felt like the object was asking a silent question. Who are you? It wasn't speaking our language. It wasn't communicating directly. But its behavior, its reactions, felt like a conversation happening in the darkness, A conversation measured in heat and light. A conversation where the quiet between pulses felt far louder than the pulses themselves. By the end of the month, even the skeptics had grown uneasy, because if the object changed when we watched, what would happen if we stopped? Would it resume its mission? Would it stop pulsing? Would it reveal something new, or something far worse? One scientist wrote a message on her whiteboard before leaving the lab one night. We're not observing it anymore. It's observing us. And deep in the data, in the quiet moments between the pulses, something new began to appear. A shift, a curvature, a rising signal, the start of a new pattern. A pattern that suggested the object wasn't just reacting, it was preparing for the next stage, the next signal, the next awakening. What kind of machine learns from being watched? The answer waited in the next chapter, in the curve that would change everything. There are moments when the universe speaks in a way you can't ignore, not with sound, not with movement, but with light, pure, rising, impossible light. And for 3I/Atlas, that moment came just as it approached the edge of the inner solar system, the place where our sun's warmth fades and the cold begins to reclaim everything. Most scientists assumed the object's anomalies were slowing down. The pulses had softened, the heat cycles leveled. Even the shifting panels seemed to settle into a steady rhythm. It felt tired, like a traveler preparing to leave, like a machine winding down after completing its purpose. But then, when no one expected anything more, 3I/Atlas woke up. A flash burst across the data screens, bright, sharp, pure, and then another, and another. Not pulses, not fragments, not the triad. This was something entirely different. A curve began forming, a rising, perfect sweep of light that grew stronger with every passing second. No comet had ever done this. No asteroid. Nothing natural in space produces a perfect rising curve of brightness while moving away from the sun. It was like watching a candle flame grow in reverse, from small to bright to blinding. The first scientist to see the curve reportedly whispered one word. Why? Because the shape of the curve didn't look random. It didn't look like reflection. It didn't look like sunlight bouncing off a surface. It looked like activation, a system powering on, a signal rising, a climax building inside a quiet machine. The curve grew higher, smoother, more deliberate. Every few minutes, telescopes around the world lit up with alert messages. The brightness was increasing faster than any model could predict. And then something even stranger happened. The curve stopped being just brightness. It began showing structure. Tiny oscillations, tiny variations, patterns within the rising light. To the naked eye, it looked like a perfect arc, but in high-resolution data, it wasn't smooth. It was layered, like a fingerprint written in light. One astrophysicist compared it to a crescendo. Another called it a rising note from an instrument we don't understand. Online, people began calling it the farewell signal, a poetic ending to the story of 3I/Atlas. But the scientists who were closest to the data felt something very different. This didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a beginning. Because the curve wasn't fading. It wasn't a flare, or a burst, or a dying glow. It was rising with precision, with purpose, with intention. Like a machine waking up after a long sleep, or reaching a scheduled milestone. One researcher from Japan wrote, "This isn't a farewell. This is an activation." The question echoed across labs. Activation of what? No one knew. But the curve continued to rise. It climbed past every known brightness model, past the thermal limits of ice, past the reflectivity limits of rock, past any explanation that could fit inside the rules of nature. And yet, the object didn't break. It didn't crumble. It didn't explode. It simply rose, as if something inside was unfolding, awakening, revealing itself layer by layer. One scientist described the curve as a perfect mathematical expression, like something designed to be read, interpreted, decoded, but even the best code breakers couldn't understand it. The curve wasn't random, but it wasn't familiar either. It was right in between, recognizable enough to feel meaningful, but alien enough to hide its message. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the brightness peaked, a secondary signal emerged, a faint echo underneath the rising light. A pulse, slow, steady, deliberate. The same pulse the object had used earlier. The same rhythm that lined the ecliptic. The same heartbeat that started this entire mystery. Except now, it was synchronized with the rising curve. Light and pulse, moving together like two voices speaking in harmony. Whatever 3I/Atlas was doing, it wasn't random, it wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. And that terrified the scientific community, because this wasn't just an object behaving strangely. It was an object completing a sequence that began near perihelion, continued through heat cycles, shifted through panels, spoke through pulses, reacted to observation, pointed back toward the void. And now, at the final threshold, it released the awakening curve. A researcher watching the live data feed whispered, "It's sending something." But to who? Some believed it was a farewell to its creators, a final message from a machine that had completed its 1,000-year journey. Others believed it was a warning, a beacon triggered by the sun, or by our telescopes, or by something hidden inside the solar system we didn't yet understand. But a few whispered a theory far more unsettling. What if we woke it up too early? What if the machine wasn't supposed to activate here? What if the sun was only a checkpoint? What if its creators expected the machine to remain silent unless something disturbed it? And humanity disturbed it. We measured it. We stared at it. We decoded it. We questioned it. And now it was answering. The awakening curve continued for 9 minutes and 43 seconds. Long enough for every major observatory to record it. Long enough for every scientist to realize this wasn't a natural anomaly. It was a transmission. A moment of clarity in a story filled with noise. A final, rising voice from something ancient, precise, and impossibly patient. And then, just as the curve reached its perfect, blinding peak, it stopped. Not faded, not drifted. Stopped. Instant. Absolute. Final. The entire solar system returned to silence. The object's brightness fell back to normal. The pulses went quiet. The panels froze, like a machine powering down after completing its task. A quiet fear settled over every lab. What woke it? What triggered the curve? What message did it send? And who or what was meant to hear it? No one had answers. Not yet. Because while the awakening curve ended, the story was not over. A faint signature remained, a warmth hidden deep inside the object, a warmth that refused to die, a warmth that suggested 3I/Atlas was not finished, and whatever came next would lead humanity into the darkest part of the mystery, the silence, the waiting, the unknown, the final chapter. There is a kind of silence in space that feels final, a silence so deep, so absolute, that it feels like the universe is holding its breath. And that's the silence the world heard when 3I/Atlas crossed the last invisible border of the inner solar system and slipped back into the long, dark road it came from. Everything stopped. The pulses, the triad pattern, the shifting panels, the rising curve of light, all of it gone. As if someone flipped a switch, as if a voice that had been whispering for months suddenly went quiet, mid-sentence. For a moment, it felt like the end of the story. A strange visitor enters our system, reveals its secrets, sends its message, and leaves. But then the last anomaly appeared. A tiny signal, soft, easy to miss, almost embarrassed to exist. A faint thermal signature, not from the surface, not from sunlight, but from the core. A warmth that refused to die. Even as the object drifted farther from the sun, even as temperatures around it dropped to nearly absolute zero, something inside stayed warm, alive, awake, waiting. It was the quietest signal of all, yet somehow the loudest message. Because nature does not stay warm in deep space. Ice freezes, metal freezes, everything freezes, except machines that are meant to keep going. And 3I/Atlas kept going. Scientists watched in disbelief as the thermal signature flickered gently, like the glow of a coal buried deep in ashes, soft, steady, deliberate. One researcher described it as a heartbeat hiding under layers of silence. But the warmth didn't rise, it didn't fall, it didn't pulse like before. It just stayed, constant, measured, controlled, a perfect temperature, held with perfect balance, warm enough to preserve something inside, cold enough to conserve energy for the long journey ahead, as if the object had entered a new state, not asleep, not alive, something in between, a standby mode, a waiting mode, a state designed for travel across lifetimes. Scientists called it thermodynamic residue. Engineers called it core preservation. But most people saw it for what it truly felt like. A sign that the story wasn't over, because warmth means purpose. Warmth means memory. Warmth means something inside still has a role to play. But the question that haunted everyone was simple. What is it waiting for? Its creators, its destination, a signal from the void it came from, another star system, another civilization, or something far more unsettling. Us. Was the object storing information? Did it collect something from our sun? From our planets? From our observation? Did it record us? And if so, what would it do with what it learned? The thermal signature remained steady for days. Then weeks. Then months. Always the same. A small, unwavering warmth, like a pilot light in an ancient engine. Meanwhile, its trajectory grew stranger. Instead of drifting randomly, the object adjusted ever so slightly, tiny micro-corrections that matched no natural force. It didn't turn. It didn't redirect. It simply refined its course, like a traveler making sure they didn't lose the path home. A path that led back toward the void. That same cold, empty region between stars. That silent place where nothing is born and nothing should survive. Yet that's where the object was going. With intention, with precision, with quiet confidence. One astrophysicist wrote, "It is not fleeing our system. It is returning to where it belongs." Another asked, "What if we were never supposed to see it?" Because everything about the object's behavior, its shielding panels, its reactive pulses, its awakening curve, felt like a machine designed to remain unnoticed unless disturbed. And humanity disturbed it. We watched it, measured it, decoded it, awakened it. Now it carried something with it. A warmth that refused to fade. A signal that felt less like energy and more like intention. A message sealed inside the silence. As the object drifted deeper into the outer solar system, its light dimmed until it was barely more than a low, distant star. A tiny speck moving across the black. But the thermal signature stayed. Some scientists suggested the object was entering a new phase. A phase meant for navigating deep space without starlight. Like an animal entering hibernation. Like a system locking itself down for a crossing that would last centuries. Others believed something else entirely. It's carrying something. Data, memory, a record of our solar system, a copy of the signals we sent, a map of our sun's magnetic field, or maybe a message for whoever waits in the dark. A message that begins with silence and ends with awakening. But one theory stood above the rest, a quiet, unsettling idea that spread through every lab. What happens when it reaches its next destination? Because if 3I/Atlas was built, then it had a purpose. If it had a purpose, then it had a destination. And if it had a destination, then the warmth wasn't just leftover heat, it was preparation. Like a machine warming its core before arrival. Like something charging itself for a new cycle. Like a messenger preparing to speak again. Not to us, but to whoever waits at the end of its long journey. No one knew when that moment would come. Decades? Centuries? Millennia? But one thing was clear. The silence we see now is not the end. It is a pause, a breath, a space left open for what comes next. As the object fades into the endless dark, its core continues to glow with that faint, stubborn warmth, a reminder that something inside remains aware. Something inside remembers. Something inside is still waiting. Waiting for the next star, the next observer, the next moment of awakening. And humanity is left with the final haunting question. When it reaches that next destination, what will it do? What will it reveal? What will it awaken? What message will it deliver? And more importantly, was our encounter with it the beginning of something, or the warning before something greater arrives? The light is gone, the signals have stopped, but the warmth remains. A quiet heartbeat drifting through the cold forever. The story is silent now, but it is not over.